This is something which you have inherited over 63 years. What Pakistan was in 1947, that you did not have even one single reputable industrial unit. Everything was on the other side of the border. From there, you have come a long way, and we dismiss all the great achievements of this country because we are always given this dose of negativism and cynicism about this country. But that's not good enough. Other countries have done better than us, and that is what we should be thinking about. So what are the deficiencies or the weaknesses in the structure of the economy which we have to think about? The first and the foremost is that we as a nation are not saving enough, and this is the savings which lead to investment, and investment leads to growth, and growth leads to poverty reduction, and poverty reduction leads to higher demand for goods and services which the businesses produce. So this is the cycle which has to be completed. So if you do not save, then you are not able to sustain growth, because the foreign savings, which are basically either borrowings or foreign direct investment, are highly uncertain. Countries do not depend upon the foreign borrowings or the foreign savings in order to have a sustained growth over time. Otherwise, you will remain dependent on the whims and the caprices of those who are financing your development. You would not be able to have the autonomy and independence to carry out your own interested model of economic development. So that is what is the problem number one in Pakistan. That we save only 15% of our GDP on average. Our investment requirement to keep at least a 5 to 6% growth rate is about 23 to 24%. So we have a gap of almost 7 to 8%, which is missing, and which we go to different foreign borrowers in order to fill in this gap. And this is the start of the process. Within the savings and investment, you have public sector and the private sector. These are the two major components of any economy. Unfortunately, for the last 3 years, the private sector is doing well, but the public sector is doing extremely poorly. And this is the imbalance primarily because government is spending more than what it is earning. Everybody talks about the situation where nobody in the world can take only 9 paisas out of every rupee of the national income and provide you the best defense, debt servicing, education, health, infrastructure, social services. It's just not possible, because the requirements of 180 million people are much substantial. So there is a second imbalance, which is between the private incomes and the public incomes. And the private incomes are much higher, but the portion of the private income, which in any civilized country goes to the public sector or to the government, is quite low in Pakistan. Across the border, Not only that their savings rates are 30% of GDP, that means they save 1/3 of their incomes. They consume only 2/3 of the income, but the tax GDP ratio, that means that the private sector, which is giving incomes to the government, is about 15%. If you raise the tax GDP ratio from 9% to 15%, I can assure you, you don't have to run to the State Bank of Pakistan for borrowing. You don't have to run to the IMF. You don't have to run to the USAID. You don't have to care for the foreign savings, because your imbalances would be taken care of by the raising of the revenues, which will finance the government expenditures. Within the government expenditure, you have two parts again. One part is the running of the government or the non-development expenditure, and the second part is the development expenditure. When your fiscal deficit is 6% or 5%, which is quite high, the first thing you do, you X the development expenditure. Development expenditure is actually investment in the future. You're investing in infrastructure, you're investing in human resources. And these are the two major factors contributing to future growth. So what you're doing is that to balance your books in the short run, you're actually trying to deprive the people of Pakistan of the fruits of growth for the future. And that is what is happening right now. Why are the interest rates so high? As Shahzad rightly pointed out, nominal interest rates do not matter. People give me a lot of credit wherever I go, कि जी आपके ज़माने में तो 3%, 4% interest rate होता था. But they forget that at that time, the inflation rate was also 3%. So when the interest rates were 4% and the inflation was 3%, the real interest rate was 1%. And that is what actually is the right variable. It is not the nominal interest rates. In Brazil, the inflation rate was 1,000%. So you start a taxi drive from PC Hotel to the airport, the driver will not ask you what the fare will be at the point you boarded the taxi, but at the point where you discharged the passenger, that is the price he will ask you. Because during this half an hour or 45 minutes, the rate of inflation has jacked up the prices. And the interest rates there were 1,010%, 1,020%. You do not want to have a situation where you get into speculative and hoarding activities, where if the real interest rate is low, people hoard up gold, real estate, stocks, and other commodities, which again have the second round effect of increasing the prices. Therefore, the real variable is the real interest rate. And why is the interest rate so high in Pakistan? The government of Pakistan is crowding out the private sector because it has a huge appetite which is being met by the banking sector and by the State Bank of Pakistan. And you print currency notes, which is what the State Bank does, you create inflation in the economy. That is the number one factor behind the inflation. So the government has to reduce its fiscal deficit. If it doesn't reduce a fiscal deficit,